I am so pleased to bring Lance Gardner to the Outdoor Art Club today. Lance is an actor and producer who was appointed as Marin Theatre's executive artistic director after a nationwide search a little over a year ago. He was born and raised in the Bay Area and is well known to local audiences for his many leading appearances on stage at Marin Theatre, as well as Berkeley Rep, Cal Shakes, Magic Theaters, TheaterWorks, Silicon Valley, and many others. Before coming to Marin Theatre, Lance was an events producer at KQED. He helped launch KQED Live, a year-round, in-person and virtual events program where he crafted unique experiences marrying journalism, arts, and entertainment. So before the 1960s, American theater was concentrated in New York City. Our theater in Mill Valley was founded in 1966 at a time when the concept of regional theater first spread in the country and grew to a network of more than 1,800 institutions. For almost 60 years, our jewel of a playhouse on Miller Avenue has been a rising force in the American cultural scene and gained national attention for staging groundbreaking work, including many premieres of plays by new American playwrights. But we should not take Marin Theatre for granted. The COVID-19 pandemic left our theater and every regional theater around the country in a precarious position. 2 to 3 regional theaters are closing every month in America for the last several years. Recently, Cal Shakes in Orinda was one of those. Marin Theatre needs our support now more than ever, and I'm excited to hear from Lance about how we can support the theater that adds so much to our community. To remind us how important theater is, I want to share an excerpt from a call to action written last week by Lauren Gunderson, who was Marin Theatre's playwright in residence for several years. And she says, "The performing arts especially insist on congregation. Theater demands togetherness to exist. And to make a place and a purpose for gathering in empathetic fellowship is a radical and now quite necessary act. To theater is an act. To audience is an act. It is to create and gather and witness. It is to bring yourself and welcome others and to behold humanity." Let's welcome Lance Gardner.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you so much. Oh, go ahead. Oh, sure. Thank you for hosting me. This is really lovely, and the meal was excellent. I just want to say how much I appreciate the values that were read. We're at the theater. We're in the process of rewriting our own value. Am I speaking too loudly?
No.
Okay, good. Of rewriting our own values. Hi back there in the other room, and it's hard to write a set of values that's all encompassing and that you can stand behind on a daily basis when you meet with people. And the message of kindness and of recognizing the little things really resonates with me on an individual level. So thank you for that inspiration. And thank you for inviting me into this room. This is not the kind of room that I spend a lot of time in. I mean, I guess I spend a lot of time in the theater, and it looks a lot like the theater, but I appreciate this access and the opportunity to talk to you. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the theater that I run, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the American theater as well. You'll excuse me, my notes are on paper, but they did not print entirely, so I will be reading a little bit off of my phone as well. But you have my full attention, as I hope I do yours. So before we start, I would like to just read to you a list of theaters that have closed recently. Aston Rep in Chicago, Atlanta Lyric Theater in Atlanta, Bay Area Children's Theater, Oakland, Berkshire Playwrights Lab, Massachusetts, Boho Theater, Chicago, Book It Repertory Theater, Seattle, Exit Theater, San Francisco, First Folio Theater, Chicago, Fool's Fury, San Francisco, House Theater, Chicago, the Humana Festival of New Plays, Louisville, Interrobang Theater Project, Chicago, The Lark, New York, Lincoln Center Theater Directors Lab, New York, Main Street Theater Company, in Rancho Cucamonga, Metropolitan Playhouse in New York, the New Coordinates, Chicago, New Ohio Theater in New York, Rep Stage in Maryland, Piano Fight, San Francisco, the Right Brain Project, Chicago, San Diego Rep, San Diego, Sideshow Theater, Chicago, Single Carrot Theater, Baltimore, The City Company, New York, Southern Rep, New Orleans, St. Luke's Theater, New York, Theater 22, Seattle, Triad Stage, Greensboro, North Carolina, Tricklock Theater, Albuquerque, Under the Radar Festival, New York, Unexpected Stage Company, Washington, D.C., and of course, right here in the Bay Area, Cal Shakes. So I start with that dark list of closures to highlight the peril of the American theater. We are in trouble in a lot of ways. And our trouble comes from many angles. First and foremost, there is a financial pain that theaters are experiencing after the COVID-19 pandemic, when many had to shut and were supported by grants and by forgivable loans and by non-forgivable loans. And in the process of receiving assistance, many of these theaters lost sight of both the need to engage with donors and funders, but also lost sight with the need to produce meaningful theater. So in the return to theater, there has been, I'll call it an epidemic of producing for the sake of producing for the sake of keeping the doors open. And it's hard to develop an audience, it's hard to develop a future when all you're doing is trying to stay alive and not living. So I come from the Bay Area. I was born and raised here, sort of all over, Berkeley, Oakland, San Jose, Cupertino, and I consider myself a lifer here. I don't have any plans to leave, and I sometimes look down my nose at people who show up here from out of town and think they know what's up. But even though I found myself in the theater very early in elementary school and knew that my heart was in the arts, it took me a long time to get where I am today, and it was not written in stone. So I'd like to read a little bit from what I wrote a few years ago about my journey. I wrote this after having quit acting because I had a family. I had, at the time, 2 children. I now have 3. And I was making, in my most flush years in the theater, about $35,000 in a year as an actor. And I was, at the time, considered probably the most successful stage actor in the Bay Area. I was working more than anybody else was, making $35,000 a year and trying to raise 2 kids with a wife who was a school teacher. So I quit acting, and I went back to school to be an EMT. I thought about getting into the fire service because I had spent my whole life in a place of fiction, and it was time for me to live in the real world. What I discovered in that process was that the real world is crazier than any fiction that you can imagine. So I found myself in this situation. About 10 years ago, I was on an airplane to New York. It was my wife's 90th my wife's grandmother's 90th birthday. Don't get any ideas. Um, my wife's grandmother's 90th birthday, and I wanted to show my family around Manhattan before we headed up to Connecticut for the matriarch celebrations. 3 years earlier, I had abandoned my life as an artist in naive pursuit of the American dream. I went back to school, studied firefighting, of all things, and got certified as an EMT. I'd been working on an ambulance and steadily turning out applications to fire departments up and down the state of California. I was a model citizen, a paragon of health. I spent my days as a stay-at-home dad and worked full-time swing shift. Everything was going just as it should, according to the American dream. But as I sat fully upright and restless in coach somewhere over the Great Lakes, I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned on a movie. As a younger man, I had a string of irrational fantasies. I once imagined that I would be a poet, a professional poet, making money, doing nothing more than writing poems for Americans in America. I thought that I had something to say. I thought I was the light, bending, broken into pieces, scattered askance on the walls and faces creeping in. I bent, I writhed, I fought the shadows, I fought my own skin, I fought my mind, but through the fight I fought, I found I was never the light. I was the prism all along, solid and clear, still and receptive, a fixed instrument of truth and clarity. When we talk about starting over, we talk of clean slates, but life writes its own history on each of us with indelible callousness. We cannot erase the stories of how we tried and failed, or failed because we didn't try. There's nothing clean about new beginnings. The layers of my history X'd out and half effaced, showing through and muddy every new wrong idea of what I think I am. I am at best a palimpsest, worn thin with revision. When I look back, I see remnants of my earliest stories and of my child self looking back at me and wondering how and why I let him down. I never recall saying that what I wanted to be when I grew up was always starting over. What would that little boy I used to be have to say about how I got here? What would he say? Would he say that I should have followed the rules and listened to the grown-ups and done all the stupid things I was told to do that reeked of bullshit, even through his little nose? Or would he say the opposite, that in spite of all the middle fingers I kept in my back pocket, I folded and fell for the American dream, like so many suckers who believe that happiness is directly proportional to the length of your picket fence? I'll never know. I can't hear him anymore, that little boy. He's too far removed by years and selves. As loud as he is, he'll never be heard over all the resentment and self-doubt that is collected between us. For his sake, I'm glad that he's not here. He would have been sad to learn that I abandoned his love of science in high school because the chemistry teacher was cruel and because the drama teacher was kind. He would be sad to learn that I abandoned his desires to lead when I discovered that experience trumps ability 100% of the time. He would be happy to know how hard I've worked and sad to hear how little I've been paid. He would be proud of the sacrifices I made when I became a father for the first time and my willingness to quit acting, return to school, certify as an EMT, and work night and swing shifts on an ambulance to stay home with my second child. He wouldn't understand the gaping hole in my heart that led me back to the stage, or the deep and lasting regret I feel for giving up the thing that I gave up on art for. He wouldn't understand the hopeless inadequacy I felt when the third child was born. He wouldn't understand how the weight of his blackness would grow with America piled on top until it became too heavy sometimes to carry with a smile. And he would never understand how near the edge I had to be to throw myself at one last new beginning with the hope that maybe this would save me. He would understand the sadness, but not the depression. He would understand the frustration, but not the despair. So I would try to explain to him how loud my mind had gotten, and how the only thing I had found to drown out my thoughts were the captured thoughts of other people vibrating in my head. How I worried that if I only ever listened and didn't put my own words out into the world, that one day there would be nothing but echoes to hush my brain. I hope that, if he could, he would listen and recognize his voice. I share this as a background to how important art is to me. And I think there's often a gap in understanding between the artist and the audience when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'm here to say that it's a conversation between the artist and the audience, and that we want to entertain you, but we also want to show you life as it is, not as we think it ought to be. I think that's the most deep way to bring the theater to you, and that's what I'm trying to do in Marin. So I took over this company about a year ago, and I'll be perfectly honest that I found it in a desperate place. After the pandemic, there was not the kind of financial stability that there was. Well, there was never financial stability, but there was not the kind of financial support that there was before. And so I've spent the last year trying to hold up something that is that has been falling down for quite some time. And so I wanted to give you an example. Before we do that, just to tell you a little bit about the theater, we recently reimagined our mission. And as a group, a staff and board, we came together to talk about what it meant to be who we were as a theater in Mill Valley, and how we thought we could adapt what we were doing for the time. We decided that theater should remain at the core of what we do, always, but that we needed to be expanding beyond theater if we were going to stay relevant. So at Marin Theatre, we are a dynamic hub that creates theater and unique artistic experiences to entertain and educate the people of Marin, the Bay Area, and beyond. And our vision is to transform lives through shared artistic experiences. This leaves us open to the potential of doing more than just bringing people into a dark room for 2 hours at a time to show them what we made. We have a building that's empty 90% of the time, and we want more people there. We recently showed art in connection with our show Yaga, and that artist was able to sell, I think, 6 pieces, totaling almost $20,000 for herself. She also happens to be our scenic painter. So we're able to support community and bring in new ways of experiencing art in our space, and that's very important to us. I'm so hot. So just to give you an idea of how hard it is, but also how we're doing as an organization, I want to talk a little bit about the models of theater. So we're a nonprofit theater. We're a 501c3. We do not pay taxes to the IRS because we're a public benefit corporation, and we exist right now on about 30% ticket sales and 70% donations. This is not a sustainable model. As Tracy said, there was a time before. Yes.
Excuse me.
Oh, right. So sorry. I'll start over. No, I'm just kidding. There was a time before this nonprofit model existed, and in the 1960s, theater exploded throughout the U.S. The regional theater went from something like 28 theaters in 1960 something to 2,000, over 2,000 in the past few years. And each of these theaters competing for the same grants, competing for the same funders, competing for the same donors. At the same time, you have an existing for-profit model on Broadway where producers are looking to make a profit. Tickets are being sold at extremely high prices, and things are running forever on on tourism, basically. I call it reverse mass media. So we have a local organization that relies on our local community to support us, and hopefully our local community relies on us to present new and interesting, exciting, bold, smart, intelligent works. And then you have a third tier of theater, the community theater, which has low cost because the actors aren't paid or are paid just stipends, skeleton crew staffs, and low ticket prices. So these three models coexisting in the world make it very difficult to be in the middle where we are without adequate funding. But I wanted to put some numbers up here so you could understand a little bit about how Broadway's doing versus how we're doing. So in the last year, the Broadway League released a report about attendance. And they had 12.3 million attendees to Broadway shows. They were at 88% of capacity for all of the Broadway shows. For comparison, our most recent show at Marin Theatre was at 41% capacity. 35% of the New York metropolitan area, 35% of attendees came from the New York metropolitan area. 21.7% from New York City itself, and 13.6% from the surrounding suburbs. 47% of the Broadway audience came from the United States outside of New York City and its suburbs. And 17% of that Broadway audience came from outside the United States. So this is how I like to think about it. The New York metro area population, please bear with me, I'm so sorry to do math in front of you. The New York metro population is about 19.5 million people, and there were 70 productions in that year. So if you break it down on a per show basis, that's about 279,000 people per production. So without tourism, those Broadway shows essentially would have been at 30% capacity from their local audiences. There are 260,000 people in Marin County. Our most recent show was at 42% capacity. So if you think about theater just as a local endeavor, we're doing just fine. But what Broadway has over us and what the world tells people about theater is that we should be doing better. We don't have people coming in to see our shows from other places, and I don't think that Mill Valley wants another 100,000 people trying to find parking on Miller. So we need more community support, and that community support needs to come from people like you. But I want to have a dialogue about what we're doing and what we could be doing better. I believe that I have things to show you. I believe that I know better than you about some things, and I believe that you know better about your tastes than I do. But we can't get to where we need to be as an organization to remain open without these kinds of conversations. So our most recent show had an average ticket price of $43. The Broadway average ticket price was $160. Let me see. $161.20 per ticket. If we were to try to exist on ticket prices alone, and we were reaching 88% capacity like Broadway, we'd have to charge $125 a ticket to meet our current year's budgetary goals. And I don't want to do that. I mean, I do want to do it, but I just don't think that we can get a large enough audience that way. Of course, at our current 41% capacity, we would have to charge $250 a ticket, and that's just not going to happen. I'm telling you this as an appeal, but as an education. I think that very few people have a strong understanding of the finances of a theater. So, for example, actors, like I said, I made $35,000 a year at my most flush as an actor. Actors are making $800 a week at our theater, and it's one of the better paying theaters in the area. That's like $42,000 a year if they were working 52 weeks a year, which they can't possibly do. That kind of work is just not available to actors. So at a bare minimum, we are failing as an institution in the American theater because we don't have the right model to succeed. The successes that we do see in the American theater are theaters that have endowments, large endowments that keep them afloat. Theaters in city centers where there is robust tourism, and theaters who have some sort of niche that's speaking to the population. And when I was in my late 20s, I wrote a paper that I didn't publish, calling for people to let theaters fail, so that we could see what life would be like without them. And now that I'm here in this position, I don't disagree with that. I don't, because I don't want to produce theater just to keep the theater open. I want to produce it because it's meaningful to you and because it's meaningful to me. So people often ask why you should care about the theater. And I say maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should treat it as secondary to more obviously impactful social benefit organizations so that you can feel the weight of theater's absence and let the children's 2 generations hence discover from a place of ignorance the desire to gather together and act out the real and imagined world for each other. Because that might be the only way that we finally come to realize what this is worth to us. Theater started as ritual. It was not to sell tickets. It was not to make a statement. It was out of a deep desire, not even a need, a desire. And I believe that that desire still exists in us, but the problem is that we're saturated with opportunities to fulfill desire. And so maybe we can't get back to that need without the absence of something like the theater. So on that bleak note, I would like to talk about some positives. So I do want to tell you about my season. This is my first season as I've been here for a year, but this is the first season that I chose to present. And so what an artistic director does is I sit in my office and I twiddle my thumbs, and I try to read as much as I can, and I ruminate on current events and on history and on the future, and try to curate something that I think has meaning in the context of the world. So when I came into this organization, I was coming in, taking over from another man who had been in leadership, being put into a position of leadership as a man on the tail of a woman's loss for the bid of presidency a few years earlier. And I know you're not a political organization, I heard that. I have always been a feminist. Yes. And so I felt that it was important to highlight the power of women and women's disempowerment in the season again, not in a finger-wagging way, but as I say, theater shows the world as it is, not as we think it ought to be. And I think that if we can show the people the world as it is, they can make their own choices about how and when to change it. And we've been sold a message of hope that I think has fallen flat. And I think that the new message needs to be a message of action. In the theater, we don't hope that a play goes well. We act in it. We produce it. We build things. So I built for you a season that examines the power and disempowerment of women. The first show, how many here saw Yaga? All right, cool. The first show, Yaga, was based on the Eastern European folklore of Baba Yaga, and like hinged on a murder mystery, and sort of deconstructed the character of Yaga, and took a look at her not as an evil old witch, but as a vital, sexy, multi-generational, eternal entity. That was one of the more successful shows of the past few years, and I'm so proud of what it meant at the time for us as a theater and for America going into our most recent election. The next show that we have coming up is a collaboration with Transcendence Theater in Sonoma, and they're presenting their Broadway holiday show on our stage. So every year they bring in Broadway stars to sing holiday tunes and Broadway tunes, and we're really proud to provide them an opportunity to do that on our stage. So we'll be presenting that for only 5 nights, and tickets are on sale right now. That starts December 12th. I hope you'll join us for that. We have a special VIP lounge as well for certain ticket holders, where we'll have wine and bites. So that is the fun holiday thing that we're doing before we get back into the nitty-gritty. In February, I will be starring in a play called Waste. Waste is a play written in 1907 and immediately banned. It involves a politician in the UK who has a brief affair with a woman who gets pregnant, and the remainder of the play is about how that impacts his political career. But in the course of considering how it impacts his political career, the woman is forgotten, and it's a take on how men in small rooms consider the lives of women without them present. We have a play called It's True, It's True, It's True. And this is about the Renaissance painter Artemisia Gentileschi, who took her mentor to court for sexual assault. And this actually draws on the transcript of that court trial from 17th century Italy. And it's translated into English, and then additional context is added. But this is a fast-paced play where people are playing multiple characters, and we're going to revitalize our smaller space. We have 2 spaces, the Boyer Theater, which is a 230-seat theater, and the Solly Lieberman Studio Theater, which is about 99 seats. So for the first time in years, we'll be doing that play in there, and I'm also hoping to collaborate potentially with Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco for that one as well. We're bringing in a touring play called Mrs. Krishnan's Party, which is by a company from New Zealand called Indian Ink. And this is set in a small apartment behind a shop. And it's a widow who has been visited by her friend on the eve of a holiday. And they cook together and involve the audience in lots of fun ways in creating a party to celebrate this holiday. And this will actually be presented physically. You will be physically seated on the stage. We will not use our house seats for that, but it'll be in the round on the stage. And I'm very excited about that new use of space. And then finally, we have a play called Do You Feel Anger? And this is about a woman's experience in the workplace when they bring in an empathy coach to try to get the men to understand how to feel. It is an absurd, yes, an absurdist comedy that takes a look at at reality in a very funny way. So that's what we have for our season, and I really hope to see you there. I really hope that that we can provide something for this community that is meaningful to the community. And if you come to the theater and you don't like what you see, I want to hear from you. I want to hear why. I want it to be a dialogue, because I don't expect to just force theater upon people and then have them turn their noses up at me if they don't like it. I don't know everything. I know a lot of things, but not everything. And I need you to be in dialogue with me about what you didn't like and what you didn't understand. And hopefully I'll have an opportunity to share with you something new in the future. So the way that we stay alive, like I said, is through contributions from generous people. So donations are always available, but we really also rely on the word of mouth. We rely on people telling their friends and their family members and their out-of-town guests that there's something going on in Mill Valley. There's always something going on in Mill Valley at Marin Theatre. So I thank you very much for your time today. I hope I haven't bummed you out too much. And I would love to take some questions if you have them. Thank you.
Please wait for the microphone. In the past, has there ever been a concerted effort to create an endowment for the theater?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I know there have been efforts. No, you know what? There was a small endowment in the 1990s that ended up being spent. Yeah.
It just seems like even large companies, the symphony,
Yeah.
have large endowments.
Even they are still struggling. Donations are slower to come in, attendance is down. I was at the symphony a couple of weeks ago. It was very popular music. It was Gershwin, and still there was maybe 90% of the theater. But,
Yeah.
Normally some years ago that was been hard to even get a ticket to.
Yeah, we have the benefit of lower operating costs than those large institutions, but the problem is we don't have as big a reach, so it's hard to attract large donors. But this is a perennial problem. I found a document from 1996 that complained about rising costs, that complained about losing a big donor at the time and thinking that there wasn't going to be an ability to survive for another 10 years. And lo and behold, of course, somebody comes along and the theater survives for another 10 years, and then there's another crisis. And it happens over and over and over again. Oh.
I was wondering, I love the idea about it doubling as an art gallery.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other ideas you have about filling the building when it's not being used for theater? Because isn't it hard if you have like a sets for a play set up and...
It is. Like I said, we have two spaces. So with some work, our smaller space could be a useful community space. I've thought about I live in Palo Alto, and there's a teen arts council, and they do teen open mic nights, they do teen gatherings, stuff like that. And that smaller space would be great for those kind of things. When we do have sets, sometimes we're able to close the curtain and use the front of the stage for speaker. We could use it for speakers, for comedy, that kind of stuff. And then rentals, of course, is something that we haven't had the opportunity to explore because we don't have staff to manage rentals right now. But the lobby too it's a great wide open space where we've held salsa classes, and we're lucky in that we have a liquor license too. So when we do have a show, we make a decent amount of money on concessions, and there might be opportunities to expand weeknight or evening offerings when we're not showing plays, and open up the cafe and do stuff in the lobby. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, I would love to see a speaker series that maybe you could utilize one of your spaces for.
Yeah.
They used to have one up at the Civic Center here. My fantasy is that would be something that would be well received here in Marin. And my second question is, what percentage of your attendees come from seasoned subscribers?
In the most recent year, by percentage, I'm not sure. We had about 600 individual subscriptions that we sold, down from about 1,400 before the pandemic, and we served last year about 8,000 total people. This year we're on track to serve over 10,000, but a low percentage comes from subscribers, somewhere between 25 and 50%.
Hi. You mentioned the financial crisis in theater, but there's also a demographic crisis in theater. And I was wondering what the Marin Theatre Company you were doing to address that issue and to bring in younger, more diverse audiences.
Yeah, we just restarted our education program, and we're taking a new approach to it with a different offering of classes. We are bringing in students for matinees. Of course, we had 220 students for our most recent student matinee, and some of these were kids who had never seen theater before. I think the demographic shift, or I like to think of it as additive. We're not looking to push out any demographic. Like I said, we're at 41% capacity, so we need more people to come into the theater. But I think education is a big component of it in the long game, creating a culture of theater going and introducing kids to theater at any age before they're adults. Then another point from the Broadway League data was that I think it was something like 85% of attendees were college graduates and 40% had post-secondary degrees. So the value of education in creating a culture of theater going is extremely important. But we also need to think the other way too. How can we make theater accessible to people who have not cultivated that culture? I think the other thing is creating dynamic opportunities for events. So instead of just telling people you show up our shows are at 7:30. You show up at 7, you get a drink, you sit down in the theater, you see the show, you go home. Having pre-show activities and post-show activities that give people a real night out, partnering with restaurants or having dining in-house, that kind of thing is the kind of thing that gets younger people out too. And I think older people enjoy stuff to do just as much as young people do. Yeah. I don't think I know, I'm not stupid.
Ellie Midnick was the program chair in theater several years ago.
Ellie Mednick was the program chair of Marin Theatre a few years ago.
And she did dinners before the play in the little area there out in which were very well attended and very popular. And I assume made some money. It's very much what you're saying, with new ways of using the space, and I would recommend that if that's something to think about.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, hosting dinners in the space before the show. And I recently actually heard from a longtime subscriber and donor who said that that's how he came to the theater in the first place, that his group of bicyclists had a hosted dinner, and 30 of them in their 30s at the time became subscribers. and were subscribers for many, many years, and he's a lifelong patron. So I am absolutely looking at ways to do that, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, close enough? Yes. So before the pandemic, maybe more, maybe 10 years ago or something, I think the Marin Theatre Company collaborated quite a bit with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which of course has emerged recently from its own near-death experience. And I'm wondering, I think maybe because they were very much the larger organization, sometimes they would stage something and then it would come down here. I don't quite know how it worked. I wonder if that's something that is interesting for you guys to explore now that I think they're kind of back.
It is interesting. So a couple things. I don't know if there were any plays that were staged up there and then came down here, although that is a possibility. But there was also a lot of communication and opportunities to do independent runs of the same plays that they were doing up here. I mean, up there, down here. And I think beneficial to us, Gabriella Colicchio has just been hired as their managing director up there. And Gabriella was previously a managing director at Marin Theatre Company, and is a person I know and who I would like to collaborate with. So I am looking for opportunities to do that. I will say though, that theater is interesting because you have Broadway, you have OSF, you have places like us, and it's really the same people. They're generally directors and designers will stay in New York, but actors will come out here and work. The quality of the production doesn't depend so much on the location. It depends on the finances, and it depends on the individuals. And the individuals who we have here, who we hire, are the most professional in the business. So as much as I would love to collaborate with OSF and plan to try to do in the future, I'm also confident that what we do here is worthy of other people trying to pick up elsewhere. Yes?
Maybe this already happens and I don't know about it, but Penn High has such a wonderful drama program taught by a fantastic Valley boy who's now a man. But is there some way that Marin Theatre Company could be part of that?
Their program is almost too good. In that I don't know if they need us. We do collaborate with them. They are in the groups that come to see shows, and we're working on other collaborations. But their program is so robust, and they're so active in what they do that they don't need a lot of intervention from outside. So in that case, I'm looking for opportunities to add to what they're doing. But in many other cases, I'm looking for opportunities to fill gaps in learning. So I am definitely, they're down the street. It's an obvious collaboration opportunity, but I'm really looking for people and schools who are in more need of programming than them.
Well, as a long-time Marin Theatre and support, I really love seeing local artists. And, I know sometimes you can bring somebody in from New York and it's exciting and all that kind of stuff, but I just want to give you a little my feedback. I think we have really a lot of talent in the Bay Area that, it's great to showcase.
I agree, 100%. And this year, apart from the touring production from New Zealand, we've hired almost entirely in-town actors, local actors and directors and designers, and that's something that's very important to us. In the future, we will of course hire people from out of town, but a lot of those people who are out of town used to be from somewhere else, right? There are plenty of people who are in New York who are in films and on Broadway who came from the Bay Area and they left because there wasn't enough work. So my real dream is to be able to provide a home for artists that can provide the kind of, ACT, they had a resident company forever, and they were able to provide a life for artists. There were, the company was 6-8 people, and they taught, they acted, and that's all they did. I hope that someday we can do something similar, because it's hard to commit fully to something as an artist when you're worried about what's next, and you're worried about paying the bills. So,
Done with our Q&A.
okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I have one last parting thing, and this is this is something I wrote in thinking about what I like to see produced. So I call this 7 things about playwriting your friends are afraid to tell you. Number 1, your play is too long. So you're adapting Infinite Jest for the stage. Are you writing for actual people with actual butts that will be sitting in actual seats? Of course, there are extraordinary epics that will resonate in the halls of theater history, but it's a short list of long nights that prove to be worth the effort. Instead of trying to pen the next Hamlet or Angels in America or the Mahabharata, try trimming the fat by focusing on a single storyline or time frame. We don't need to see the protagonist's second cousin once removed buying the guacamole for the baby shower. You probably don't need the second cousin at all, or the baby shower. Speaking of babies, we don't need to follow a character through the entirety of their life to care about them. Pick a time and a place and don't go too far. An audience is perfectly capable of understanding that things happen before and after the action of the play. Imagine a world of 90-minute gems where nobody shifted in their seats or looked at their watch, where people could go to the theater on a weekday without worrying about paying the babysitter for another hour, or how much sleep they were going to get before the next day. You, dear playwright, can make this world a reality. 2, you don't have to show it if you can just say it. When was the last time you saw a living person pretend to die on stage? It's not pretty, and I don't believe it. I would be much more interested in the reactions of the characters who live on. Instead of shooting the guy on stage, let the guy's wife tell their kid. That way, we don't have to learn the information and then watch somebody else learn what we already know. Congratulations, you just shaved 5 minutes off the play. Scene number 1, by losing the death scene. Number 3, your play has too many characters. Slow your roll, Elmer Rice. If you're writing for middle school, then by all means, go right ahead with a happy horde of one-line wonders. But if you'd like to see your play get more than a one-weekend stand at the hands of preteens, you're gonna have to cut and consolidate. Ask yourself, does this really have to be said by somebody new? If it's just information that you're trying to get across, put the line in the mouth of one of your existing characters instead of introducing Eddie exposition in the penultimate scene. Think about it. Do you really need Walter's number 1 and 2 for your restaurant? Waiters number 1 and 2 for the restaurant. Try cutting the waiters entirely and adding a line about the terrible service. If your minor characters are absolutely essential to the story, then consider writing in double casting. Theaters are limited in the number of actors they can afford to hire. If your play is good and easy on your budget, it'll be hard to ignore. 4, for men, women don't really talk like that. Hey, Daddy, you're so hot when you tell me I'm wrong about how much space you take up on the subway. Do write women into your plays. In fact, as you write, consider that the gender of your character may not be important to your telling of your story, but that the freedom of the director and actors to choose, or not, the gender of a character may be very important to someone else. Don't put your fantasies on paper and expect anyone to produce them. It's okay to have dirty thoughts. It's okay to write them down. And in certain cases, it's okay to share them on stage if they have a broader, more complicated implication. But when all you're doing is writing a thinly veiled version of yourself into a scene with a not so thinly veiled version of a sex robot, you're hurting your chances of anyone ever taking you seriously. Show your play to a woman before you show it to anyone else. Ask for her opinions on the female characters and listen to what she says. Number 5, for women, men don't really think like that. Whatever complicated, cathartic stream of consciousness you've written to emanate from that male character's mouth, the truth of what the man he was based on was thinking is much less complicated. The CPU of the patriarchy really is all your worst fears. Like it or not, men do exist in the real world, so you should consider including them in some of your plays, but since none of them are going to heed the advice above, maybe you should take the opportunity to tilt the scales toward balance. Number 6, stick to prose. If everyone who penned a play wrote verse in place of prose today, the theater would go away. Trust me. And last, number 7, the audience is never going to understand what you want them to, so just have fun. If you think that you know what your play is about, think again. Anything you put on the page that has special meaning to you probably has a completely different special meaning to somebody else. Or maybe they just won't get it. You won't be there to hold the audience's hand as they work through your play, or when they ruminate on it after they leave. So just write it in a style, structure, and language that is meaningful to you and let it go. Don't be ham-fisted with your morals. Don't dumb something down for the mouth breather in the 3rd row. When I give a gift, I choose something that I like for the other person. That way, I'm not just giving them something they want. I'm sharing a part of myself with them. A play is a living gift. Craft it with joy, give it with love, and go the hell home. Thank you.